Hello and welcome to another episode of Global Tantrum. My name is Steve Pally. With me, as always, is my co-host, Professor Galen Jackson. This is the podcast where two or more political scientists, IR specialists, do their level best to explain the post-war world to ourselves and then also hopefully to you. That's our tagline. We've taken a week off. We're back. Galen, how are you doing?
Better than the Timberwolves after last night, man.
Oof. Oof. Yeah. Yeah, man. It's like, what are they calling Wemby now? The alien?
Well, they've been called, yeah. I thought it was funny. Finch, the Minnesota coach, said that his team got punked.
They did
That
get punked
tells you
by,
everything you need to know.
yeah, a 7'7" Frenchman and his buddies.
Yeah.
What are you going to do, right? Yeah, that dude's jumper is wet too for such a big guy.
He's only 22. So.
Only 22. We're going to be hearing about him for a very long time. Is Ant back? Is he playing again?
Yep, he did.
Okay. All right.
Yep.
That gives him a fighting chance, I guess.
Yeah.
So we took a week off. In case anybody's wondering, my other computer's not working. So I'm in the study today. I'm in the lounge.
It looks good, man.
Yeah. I got MF Doom behind me. So that's good.
Yeah.
One of my favorite esoteric rappers. So we've got the main event today, but I think we should do a brief check-in on Iran as that situation's still percolating. You want to give us the latest on Iran?
Sure. I'm going to try to do it in like 30 seconds because I just
Awesome.
don't think there's that much to catch up on. Apparently, the Trump administration has submitted a proposal via Pakistan to Iran, which Iran is now reviewing. To my surprise, markets still respond to the White House saying, yeah, the war's almost over. So the price of oil did drop again, like 7% or something like that.
Amazing.
It seems like what is on the table is the potential to restart talks to end the shooting and perhaps reopen the Strait of Hormuz, although it is unclear whether the previous state of affairs governing free passage through that waterway will be revised.
Right.
And then focus on the nuclear file over the longer term, which is to say, I am not optimistic that the situation will be better from an American standpoint than it was before the war started. And the fighting in Lebanon is still quite fierce at the moment. So that's all we've got.
Got it. So perhaps some progress, but this still seems to be a contest of wills and ability to endure suffering. Gas prices in the United States, not great. Trump's popularity in the United States, falling like pretty steadily and systematically. Meanwhile, certainly the Iranians have been pummeled. They are making less money from their oil. On the other hand, I've seen reporting that they continue to dig out their missile launchers.
Yeah.
And they're like, we got reporting a few weeks ago that like more than half of their missile launchers were still operational. That the new number is up to like 70%. So I assume
I did not see that report. Oh,
yeah, okay. They've had a few weeks to like dig stuff out and make it operational again. So they've done that. There was a brief flurry of fighting last week when the U.S. tried to reopen the Strait by force, basically Operation Freedom, whatever it was called. And the Iranians pounded the UAE just to show that like they could. And so Trump backed away and
the price of oil shot up as a result. So unsurprised.
Exactly. So yeah, it is very much sort of like a standoff that continues.
And just to weave things into where we're going, I think probably there's some connection to the fact that Trump is supposed to visit China, I think, next week.
That's right.
And the Chinese have been very clear that they would like the war to stop and the Strait of Hormuz reopened. So,
yep. And they're very powerful and they have leverage over both the Iranians and the United States. So again, I think both parties are motivated to make a deal. The question is whether they're motivated enough to like find something in the middle that's mutually acceptable. We'll see. But yes, that summit between Trump and Xi has already been pushed back once or twice. It was supposed to happen in April, from what I'm remembering. But we are actually this week going to go to China, where we think the main event is, and not just us, also major foreign policy thinkers in the Trump administration. The main event is not in Eastern Europe and Ukraine. The main event is not even in the Persian Gulf or the Strait of Hormuz. These are flashpoints and active conflict zones. But in the final analysis, do they actually matter as much as the Taiwan Strait? We don't think they do. We think the main event is in the Taiwan Strait. Several American administrations have said the same thing, and they've tried to pivot to Asia, including in the last national security strategy, where this is the strongest priority outside of the Western Hemisphere for foreign policy. Is like, no, we actually need to like keep the Chinese bottled up in the so-called first island chain, which means basically keeping Taiwan independent. But yeah, we're going to view this from the Chinese perspective, because while we've been sort of distracted with Ukraine and AI superintelligence and, the Iran war, all important topics, something potentially even more important has been happening on the Chinese side, right, Galen? And that is really like the wholesale gutting and refashioning of the Chinese military by the absolute dictator of China, Xi Jinping. Would you set the table for us on that?
Yeah, I mean, it's been a quite significant set of purges of the Chinese military. Going back to 2022, there have been, we think it's a little hard to tell because the system is opaque and it's not always announced, but certain military officials that previously were in certain positions are no longer there. As many as 100 Chinese officers have been removed, and something like 35 generals and lieutenant generals. And just today, two former defense ministers, I think they were sentenced to death, but that was commuted to life imprisonment.
That's right.
Um, Now, the defense minister position is not as important in China. The real power is in the Central Military Commission under the control of the Chinese Communist Party, the CCP. But nevertheless, two of the highest ranking military officials that have been arrested as a part of these purges just announced today. And this raises all sorts of questions about why Xi Jinping, China's leader, is doing this and what the implications would be for China's military operational readiness if a shooting war with the United States were to break out in the Taiwan Straits. So this has been going on now for roughly 4 years, at least when it comes to the military. Xi's anti-corruption purges and campaign go back to 2012 when he first became general secretary of the CCP. But a lot of people have been looking at this and wondering what the implications of this could mean for the US-China military competition in the Indo-Pacific. So we wanted to spend some time talking about why it's happening and what the implications could be.
Yeah, because again, we think that the Taiwan Strait is probably the most important potential conflict zone in the entire world, because if things were to really get going between the United States and China over Taiwanese independence, it could result in,
Yeah,
World War III. Some would argue that World War III has already started and is underway. It's like your
I don't agree
mileage.
with that, but
Yeah, your mileage may vary. I think that's an effort to fit what has happened historically with World War I and World War II into like a contemporary frame. There's no guarantee that something similar will happen, where we have like sort of these peripheral conflicts and then the main event between
yeah.
the two heavyweights. We'll see. Hard to
Well,
say.
I guess in one sense there is, well, I'm sure there are other ways that there are parallels too, but one, just to kind of set the stage, is Stalin's famous military purges
Mhm.
in the late 1930s. And the only reason I'm bringing that up, since you mentioned, the world wars, is because that is a case where Soviet military readiness very much was affected by the massive scale of Stalin's purges of his own military, which was largely driven by his paranoia, his desire to consolidate control, coup-proof himself. He had suspicions of Soviet officers because many of them had kind of cut their teeth during the Russian Civil War when Leon Trotsky was kind of in charge of the Russian military campaign, at least on the communist side. There were also previously these ties between the Soviet military and the German military in the early 1920s when both countries had kind of been ostracized by the rest of the world. Something the Nazis kind of cultivated, by the way, by forging documents saying, yeah, some of these guys are scheming with us. It's unclear
Mm,
whether that actually affected. It seemed like Stalin was going to have these guys purged or killed regardless.
hmm
But the consequences of that for the Soviet Union at the outset of the war, when the Germans invaded in 1941 in Operation Barbarossa, were really severe.
mm.
Some of like the losses the Soviets suffer at the beginning of that campaign are just catastrophic. The
Entire armies getting encircled with
and
like
keep
half a
600,
million pows.
yeah, 600,000 POWs. Also the Winter War with Finland prior to that, the Soviets do
Didn't
not
work out.
perform well.
Yeah.
So, if that is a prelude to how this could impact. Now, I think the scale of those purges was quite a bit more. I think I saw a statistic that the Soviets lost more generals and colonels as a result of Stalin's purges than they did in the entire war with the Nazis,
That's insane.
which, if Victor Wembanyama had not had 12 blocks in game one, would have been the most shocking statistic I heard this week. But you see how like this could have real implications for military readiness on the Chinese side.
Yeah. So I love that. Thank you for putting that in perspective. That's kind of like the disastrous version of this. And of
Yeah,
course, look, the Soviet Union recovered. We got Zhukov, right?
correct.
Uh, yeah, they basically did the lion's share of lifting in World War II and ended up in East Germany and the entirety of Eastern Europe as
Yeah.
a consolation prize. It's not clear that that's exactly what's happening in China. I think we should provide a little bit of historical context on the Chinese military and how it works, because the fact of the matter is that corruption and lack of performance had been a big problem in the Chinese military for decades now. We can go all the way back to, I would say, the Chinese Vietnam War. That is not very well known. I think it was 1979. Uh,
1979. Yep.
yeah, where basically Deng Xiaoping was in charge of China, or
Yeah,
yes,
you're right.
he was in charge of China at that point in time, and he did not like how the Vietnamese were behaving. They had allied themselves with the Soviets more explicitly, and they had also invaded Cambodia to deal with the Khmer Rouge, which were a Chinese ally. So he had the People's Liberation Army invade northern Vietnam. This didn't go very well for either side, but especially not for China. It only lasted a few weeks, maybe a month, but it resulted in tens of thousands of casualties.
30,000 casualties on the Chinese side in 1 month. Yeah.
Yeah, and both sides kind of declared victory. That has been the last war that the Chinese military has participated in. So that's like operationally, they have not done much of anything for decades and decades now. Unlike the US military, the Russian military, um, it's like if China is to be the world's superpower at some point in time, it's like, can you be a superpower without actually ever fighting? That's an open question, right?
And
That's
I
never,
mean, you could argue that's the best way to do it.
if you can do it, right? But there's lots of questions like, does anybody in China actually know how to fight? Certainly the Chinese have gotten a lot better at equipment over time, but it's like, again, operationally and in terms of effectiveness, the Chinese military has had a huge problem with corruption and lack of performance. So we start there, we go forward through the 80s and 90s. Deng Xiaoping is an economic reformer. And it's not that he's disinterested in foreign policy, but he's disinterested in using the military as a form of foreign policy. Like his whole maxim was like, hide your strength and bide your time, I think is basically the transliteration of what he said. And that was Chinese policy. So he cut the Chinese military budget and instructed the Chinese military quite literally to go into business for itself. So it did. The People's Liberation Army took over the Chinese services sector, and you had generals actually operating businesses, owning operating businesses in China. That's a recipe for corruption, obviously. So you had several decades of that. Jiang Zemin comes in as premier in, I think, the late 90s, and he forbids that from happening anymore. It's like the army now needs to divest because we need to modernize the army. It's not a modern fighting force, right? So the budgets go up, right? But the sort of habit for corruption maintains. When military budgets go up, that's an awesome opportunity for what's called procurement fraud. So a lot of no bid contracts, a lot of ammunition that's supposed to show up that never actually does, a lot of handshake deals, a lot of money lining pockets on the one hand, procurement fraud. On the other hand, you have this culture of buying and selling military offices that was apparently quite open. Like it wasn't even open secret. It wasn't a secret. It was just open, whereby for certain amounts, you could buy yourself a colonelship or a majorship or a generalship even. So these offices were like basically trading hands like collectibles. Neither of these things are really very promising when it comes to military effectiveness, right? So this is the kind of environment that Xi Jinping comes into when he joins the Central Military Commission in 2010, right, Galen? It's like, this is not promising when it comes to actually using the Chinese military actively to expand Chinese power, right?
Yeah, so I mean, I was a little bit surprised digging into this. Just, my experience studying dictators is most of these things tend to do with, you know, consolidating power and eliminating potential rivals. And there's probably some of that going on as well.
Absolutely.
I don't think anyone thinks Xi Jinping is a big softy or that he's interested in decreasing his own power. So there's probably some of that. You know, some of the things you were just discussing could lead to stuff like patronage networks
Mhm.
at independent centers of power. So there probably is some coup proofing going on. But it does seem legitimately like a lot of this stuff does stem from genuine corruption within the Chinese armed forces, which, you and I were both reading an article in Foreign Affairs today, like is consistent with his broader approach to the CCP bureaucracy, where he has really tried to stamp out corruption since 2012 as well. Um, some of the graft you and I were reading about stuff like some of China's rockets, which,
Mhm.
China's been undergoing a major military modernization program. Some of the rockets were filled with water rather than with actual rocket fuel.
Seems like a problem.
Uh, but what example you found that some of the blast doors on silos actually were just like falling off or
That they won't open.
they won't open?
Yeah.
Okay.
So yeah, the way like land-based ICBMs work is you have like these silos in missile fields, right? And if there's a war, these things like pop open, and then the missile launches, and you have a nuclear war. Hooray!
Yeah.
But they like everybody needs to know that those blast doors are actually going to open. If they don't open, then the missile doesn't launch, and maybe it goes off in your
You
in
got a
your
big
field.
problem. Yeah.
You've got a big problem.
Yeah.
Yeah, and
You know,
apparently, like,
it, it's so stuff like that. Now, like, we should say, like, this is not uncommon with military procurement, even in democratic states, but it
mhm.
seems like it was quite rampant in this case. And that obviously is going to seriously affect military effectiveness and readiness. I think there's also a part of this that's like reasserting CCP control over the military. I
Mhm.
actually was not aware until talking to you that Dong had basically, you guys can have autonomy, like go run yourself for a while, even if you're not super concerned about things like coup threats and consolidating your power. That's not a great recipe for solid civil military relations and coordination if you're getting ready for, say, a war with the United States.
Yeah.
So it does actually seem quite plausible to me that much of this does have to do with Xi's legitimate concern about the performance of China's armed forces. I did want to say one thing about this might just be like unique to me, but like I see this argument a lot, and you're not wrong that China not having much combat experience for the past half century might impact how they perform in warfare. But I do think people take that argument too far sometimes. Like
Mm,
some evidence Saddam Hussein went to war with Iran in 1980 because he was like, this will be a nice like warm up for the war with Israel. And that obviously never
he got that
happened
one wrong.
because he
Yeah.
bogged down in 8-year conflict. Like, the Russians are currently not doing great because they started a war. So the
Yeah.
whole like staying out of wars, I think is not actually a bad strategy if you want to increase your power.
Totally. And I think it's also the case that Xi Jinping probably feels that he would prefer to accomplish reunification peacefully.
Oh,
And
I'm sure if he could do, yeah,
yeah, and I think that that's official Communist Party policy. And, it's been advertised for a while now. That being said, it's like having a military that works and is seen to work obviously improves leverage because, you have that threat that's actually credible.
yeah,
Um, and the Chinese conduct a lot of exercises, aggressive ones, in and around Taiwanese airspace and coastline,
yeah,
territorial waters, in order to threaten Taiwan and demonstrate that they could invade, they could attack if they wanted to, they could blockade, they could do all these sorts of things. But look, if you have a Central Military Commission with 7 spots on it, and you're down to 2
yeah.
people because you've fired, jailed, or given death sentences to everybody else, that sort of opens some questions. That's
Well,
who's actually
and
going
the
to
fact these purges go lower down too,
all
right?
the way down.
Yeah,
Yeah. Yeah. So it's interesting. And like, look, in the corporate world, there's this sort of, I guess, fashion or desire to create like more flattened organizations with fewer layers of management, like getting rid of middle management and having more, autonomy and, people reporting directly to the CEO, that sort of thing, with the idea that that will improve command and control and like ultimately results. Maybe part of this is like a desire to simplify the system and improve things. But it's also interesting because she has been steadily getting rid of all of these senior military guys that he put in their jobs
yeah,
himself. Like he appointed most of the people that he's purging. And so it's like, well, what does that mean? I think the most important example is this guy named Zheng Zhusha, who was the number 2 guy on the Central Military Commission up until January of this year, when suddenly, maybe not suddenly, but like suddenly to us in the West, he was basically being investigated and he disappeared. Like he literally disappeared. There was an event where senior military leaders basically attended, I think it was like a tree planting ceremony or something like that. And everybody noticed that he wasn't there digging holes like the rest of these guys. And so people in the West noticed. And then, yeah, the readout came later. It's like, oh, he's under investigation for like corruption, self-dealing, and like inability to properly reassure the chairman. I forget exactly what the wording is. Like there's a very precise wording that the
yeah,
Chinese Communist Party uses. Like language matters very much in these things. And to a certain extent, like all the sources we've read have been like, China is incredibly opaque
yeah,
at the party level and at the military level. We don't actually know why this is happening or what's going on or even where these guys have gone to. Like, yeah, Zheng Yusha has disappeared. Like he's literally disappeared. Nobody's seen him for months now. It's like, is he in jail? Is he in detention? Is he just laying low? We have no idea. Maybe he'll come back at some point.
yeah,
Probably not, though. And what's really interesting about him is he was the last guy higher up in the military who actually fought in the Chinese Vietnam War. He was the last guy with any operational experience in the Chinese military. Number one. Number two, he's close family friends with Xi Jinping. Their dads were really close during the Chinese Civil War, and they were both princelings, right? They were part of the Mao Zedong as movements, the early Communist Party, and the Long March, and all of that, right? So it's like not only is he like the last guy with any operational experience, like he's close family friends. You appointed him. You guys kind of came up together, right?
Yeah.
And now he's been disappeared too, leaving, I think, Xi Jinping and like one other guy on this council that's normally supposed to have 7 guys, right? So it's like, that's crazy. That's pretty notable.
Yeah, and it does. I mean, who knows? Maybe he was organizing some cabal. I have no
Right.
idea. But
We
like,
we don't know. Yeah.
we don't know, but it suggests that it's probably actually about corruption, or like that would be my speculation if it was Xi's handpicked guy. And she has like never had more power than he does now. Like he has
Hmm.
basically torn up the post like tacit agreement of 2 5-year terms for the
That's
CCP
right.
secretary. I think Jiang Zemin was like 93 or 92 to 2002, then Hu Jintao 2002 to 2012, and now it's going to be Xi for life probably.
He's going to
Um,
get a 4th term in 2027, and that'll be 20 years. And he's 72, I want to
Something
say.
like that. Yeah.
Yeah.
So he's
Maybe he could go for
probably
5 terms, maybe 6.
yeah,
Who knows?
he's probably the most powerful Chinese leader since Mao.
Yeah.
Um, which suggests to me like he doesn't. I mean, look, he's an autocrat. They always have to be worried about their political position and literally their heads.
Mm.
Um, but it sort of doesn't make sense that he would be concerned about, the security of his position, that it actually probably is about corruption. And, you know, we were reading a bit about these other purges throughout the rest of the Chinese political system and bureaucracy. And it seems like he has a theory of like, if you want to maintain an autocratic system that is relatively responsive to citizens' needs, like it's got to function really well, and that means you can't have corruption in it. So I kind of think it probably is about performance both there and when it comes to the military. There maybe is something I didn't know about was that there were divisions in 1989.
Oh,
Um,
yeah.
some of the political and military leaders over whether to suppress the democratic protest in Tiananmen Square with military force. And of course, ultimately, that is in fact what happened. But he certainly does not want anyone questioning him if he decides he has to do that again. Not that I think that protests like that are likely in China anytime soon anyway. But it does kind of strike me that that's what this is about. Even if in the short to medium term, as I'm sure we'll get to, maybe we'll do it right now, that probably will hinder somewhat China's military and operational effectiveness.
Yeah. Let's get to that right now. So turning to why we think this matters and what it means for the Taiwan Strait and Taiwanese independence vis-a-vis China. It's like there's kind of 2 things that cross my mind. One is whether the Chinese military will do what Xi Jinping wants it to do, whether that's blockade or invade or strike or whatever, when he wants the military to do it. That's one set of concerns, command and control. The other set of concerns is whether the Chinese military will be capable of winning a war or carrying out that policy, whatever that policy turns out being. Because in all likelihood, it's going to involve fighting the United States and possibly its allies as well.
Although we
It-
should reiterate, as we did when we did our Taiwan episodes, like the U.S. maintains this policy of strategic ambiguity, so it is
yes,
possible that the U.S. won't intervene, but it is certainly China's assumption that it will be fighting the United States as well.
yes. And that is a tall order, even if the United States is bogged down in the Persian Gulf. It's like, we still have
Again.
the Pacific Fleet, right? Yeah, again, continuously. So for the first sort of set of concerns, has she achieved full command and control of the Chinese military? I think the answer is yes, because there's nobody left on the 7-person commission. It's him and like basically one other guy who apparently isn't even military. He's more of a political guy. And so it's like there's kind of nobody left to say no or to be like, hey, we have some concerns or anything like that. By the way, some of this has happened inside the United States. In the second Trump administration, the defense secretary, Pete Hegseth, has been very busy, like forcibly retiring and firing senior military officers for insufficient ideological zeal, shall we say, or for other reasons. But like some of the writing there is on the wall and legible, I would say. So this does happen elsewhere too, and it's about will the military like do what it's supposed to do when the time comes? And I think you and I both agree. It's like yes, like there's
Yeah.
not going to be a lot of pushback at this point in time from the People's Liberation Army. Should Xi Jinping give the order, it's like, let's bombard Taiwan, let's invade Taiwan, let's blockade Taiwan. It's like, yes, yes, and yes,
Yeah.
it will do so. So that's one set of concerns satisfied. Second set of concerns, is there anybody left who knows how to do that stuff? Should the need arise? Open question,
Yeah.
right?
Well, look, I won't go too into the weeds, but like in practice, a few ways this could manifest itself, right? Like
Mhm.
there's a lot of good articles written on this recently. I'll just shout out Taylor Fravel's one, or he's written a bunch of stuff about this. But like as an example, militaries generally encourage things like taking the initiative.
Mhm.
If you're worried that you are going to be executed later on for not complying, like you could overcorrect, right? Out of fear that this has instilled this purge campaign. So like maybe combat personnel will be less likely to take the initiative on their own. Combined arms warfare, right? Really hard to do. Like
Mhm.
you want to be able to do it because it's a force multiplier, but you've got to be able to get all of your different branches of the military working together, and that generally requires close interoperability and communicating and training across different branches of the armed services. Well, if you keep removing the commanders, including going way down the chain, that could really harm your ability to do things like combined arms warfare.
And by the way, this is 10x more important in amphibious operations.
Totally.
Yeah,
Yes.
like this is the single hardest thing you can do in a military operation is in amphibious landings and in invasions. And it's partly why the Trump administration in the US hasn't done it in Iran. It's like the risks are tremendous and like the casualties could be intense. Like everything needs to be on a string. Everything needs to be perfect. You got to use
100%.
every single branch in the military to do this.
Yes. Which is why a lot of people think that's not how this would start, that China would try to blockade the island and maybe sever its, you know,
Lifelines. Yeah.
yeah, well, and its communication link, cutting undersea cables and things like that, and just really trying to bring enormous pressure on it. Now, one thing that Taylor Fravel says in some of his work, this is an important point, is it is probably the case that because of these purges, China's military preparedness has declined. That doesn't mean that there won't be a war,
Totally.
because China has gone to war previously, as he points out, when conditions were not optimal to do so. You mentioned 1979, when for a bunch of reasons, China was not really well positioned for that conflict, which was then, kind of played out in real time. As we mentioned, the casualties were really significant. 1950, China decided to go to war with the United States on the Korean Peninsula. I think it suffered like 500,000 casualties.
It was basically a gigantic multi-million person human wave.
Yeah, like just horrific casualties, right?
Yeah.
And it did that even though it's only 5 years beyond World War II and, Japanese occupation. And more importantly, like decades of the warlord period and then the Civil War, which had only ended so October 1949, like 6 months or so
Right.
early. So that I'm saying this won't necessarily prevent Xi from going to war over Taiwan if he deems the political stakes high enough to do so, just because, Chinese leadership capabilities within the military have been degraded.
Yeah, no, it absolutely wouldn't. And yeah, it's like this is the key. It's like, how does this affect military effectiveness and readiness? It's an open question. I have read some arguments. We've read some arguments that part of what Xi Jinping is trying to accomplish here is actually to make the military more effective by clearing out dead wood
Mm,
effectively. So it's like, yeah, it's like you have guys like his buddy Sheng, right? Who is old. He's as old or older than Xi. It's like probably in his 70s. He's old school. Yeah, like, yeah, he fought in the last war. Last war didn't go well. And it was not modern in any sense of the word. It was like very basic, sort of like ground operations. The Chinese military wants to conduct modern, like 2026 warfare. It wants to use drone swarms. It wants to use cyber war techniques. It wants to be sophisticated. It wants to be use these autonomous systems and things like that. So it's like, do you really want all these old school guys in charge, or do you want to get rid of them and actually have a much younger group of generals who are more aggressive? They've practiced plenty. There's all these exercises every year where they practice blockading and invading and striking. So it's like they have some practice. It's not like, they're just sitting around playing like military simulators and video games. And they're of the new school. So they're a lot closer to the technological forefront. So maybe in a way, this could actually improve readiness.
so this is kind of a tough question. Why do you think this kicked off 4 years ago, roughly? Like, what is it? Just that he waited till he was good for life, basically? He locked that in and was like, all right, now I can clean house.
I think that's exactly it. I think he had to finish destroying the old institutional structure. So he had to like get his political house in order before he had turned his attention to shoring up his military flank. And now he's absolute autocrat over 1.4 billion people, which is like, think about that. That's a crazy achievement.
Yeah.
It's like, I can't think of anybody else in history, maybe some of the Chinese emperors, I don't know, but even then, who is in more direct control over more people in an absolute sense
It's an
than this
interesting
one
claim.
guy. Yeah. But yeah, like it's crazy how much direct control this one guy has. And like, how direct can it be? It's like, yeah, like it's an immense bureaucracy, right? I don't want to like overstate the claim.
Yeah.
Um, but like, yeah, he is very concerned with efficacy. He is very concerned with like political performance. It's like you said earlier, autocracies have this problem where there's no feedback loop with elections and things like that. So things just kind of spiral out of control. The autocrat's out of touch and the party collapses. That's kind of what happened in the Soviet Union. Things aren't going well in Russia
Which
right now.
which he talks about quite a bit.
Incessantly.
Yeah.
Yeah. All the time. It's like, this is one of his chief things that he's really concerned about is like the party was out of touch and not performing well. And that is why the Soviet Union collapsed. There was nobody left who like cared enough to stand up to Gorbachev and say no. I mean, notwithstanding that there was like a counter coup
Yeah, right.
there. Yeah.
It's true.
So they actually did try. It just didn't work at that point in time in 91, I think.
August 91. Yeah.
Yeah. I remember watching that on TV with my parents and we were just like, oh my God. Oh my God. But
I do
yeah,
not,
so
but that's
yeah,
cool.
he does actually care that like the Chinese Communist Party performs well and will be in control for
Yeah,
forever.
and
Like he cares very much.
he seems to take seriously, for better or worse, because I just don't think Mao was actually that successful of a leader in a lot of ways. Certainly
No.
not for his own people. But he seems to take seriously like a lot of these kind of, whether mythical or not, core teachings, like now, like how do we satisfy like our duty, like we give the people what they want, more or less, was like the gist of it. Like,
Hmm.
he seems to care quite a bit about the performance of the party and the military. And so, I mean, look, I don't know nearly enough about this to like make bold predictions, but like my tentative takeaway from this is probably not in the short term, maybe not even in the medium term, but call it the next like decade. This probably will help China militarily, that he's
I
making
could
these reforms and these leadership changes.
I could see how it could. It's definitely a brutal way to do it, but maybe that's just how this works in the Chinese context now. It's like, yeah, everything is just like an anti-corruption campaign, whether or not there's corruption. We know in the past there has been, and in the present there probably is too. Like it will never be completely stamped out, no matter what he does, right?
Yeah.
I think he knows that, but it's really more about like control and rejuvenation of the Chinese Communist Party project and extending that into the military. Now, I think we can close because we're running out of time with an examination of like whether this means that he's planning to do it now necessarily. What do you think about that?
It being Taiwan.
Yes, do it. Meaning take over
Ah,
Taiwan. He has
yeah.
instructed the military to be ready by 2027,
Yes.
which is not very much time.
Yes. Now, that doesn't mean he has instructed them to do it in 2020.
Correct. Yeah.
Um, yeah, I don't know what's I don't know. That's my
Yeah.
answer. Now, like, I could spin a story either way here, right? Like, and this is one of the frustrations that I have. Again, I'm not a China expert, but I certainly have to like read up on it, just, since it's, as
Pretty
you were saying,
important.
this is kind of the number one national security, international security issue out there. But like, there always seems to be this like quite significant lack of agreement on all of the biggest questions, right? Like,
Hmm.
who does the balance of power favor? Like, you find wildly different answers to that. Now, like, we're seeing war games play out different. I could tell you a story, you were just saying the US got into another war in the Middle East. And a lot of the recent stories in the news about that are like how many munitions the United States has expended, not
Many.
just interceptors, which we have talked about at length. Hegseth testified in Congress, the war has already cost something like $25 billion.
And that's low, like
Yeah,
probably very low.
I agree. Like, at some point, you and I are probably going to talk about the national debt, but the national debt in the United
Yes.
States now exceeds the size of the economy.
Yes.
um,
Yes.
so, like, you could tell a story. The U.S. has systematically kind of alienated every one of its key allies for the past
Hmm.
however many years now. So maybe you could tell a story. Hey, this would be the perfect time to do it.
Hmm.
Uh, you could go the other way and say, like, why would he bring matters to a head on something this unpredictable, this dangerous, when his own political position is trending in a great direction? If you believe the US is declining relative to China, you would want to wait
What's the
more.
rush? Yeah.
Um, but all of these are questioned assumptions, right? We've talked about China has plenty of problems. Uh,
Plenty of problems. And plus, Xi Jinping has just watched two much larger countries fail
yeah,
to accomplish much of anything in wars against smaller countries, right?
yeah.
And it's like China is so much bigger than Taiwan, so much more powerful.
And
Like,
those were
yes.
not those. I mean, as you were saying, if the US wanted to escalate further, it would be an amphibious assault. But,
Yeah.
Russia, Ukraine, not an amphibious operation. The US war with Iran was totally from the air. So not as difficult to execute. So I don't know. I'm skeptical it will happen next year, but like, I couldn't tell. I feel like if I knew the answer to this, I'd be getting paid a lot more money.
Yeah. Well, we only know the answer once it actually happens, right? We only
Right.
know the answer in hindsight, which is why our business is kind of frustrating. And we often hear the criticisms like, oh, you guys are the best armchair quarterbacks or Monday morning quarterbacks around. And it's like, yes, but nevertheless, we do think it's still a good idea to at least draw attention
Yeah.
to what we think to be extremely important topics like this one. Yeah, I have no idea whether they'll be ready, and if they're ready, whether they'll do it, and if they do it, whether they'll succeed. It's like that's a 3-step problem, and each step is a big deal, right?
The other thing here, which like it just creates even more uncertainty, right, is like Biden, as we noted, I think said 4 times quite clearly, yes, the United States will come to the defense of Taiwan.
And every time people in his
It was
administration
walked
were like,
back.
"Yes, the president meant something slightly different."
Yes. Well, Trump has been much more circumspect to be like, yeah,
Yes,
I don't really want to have to make that decision. Basically, like, who knows? You said, I think correctly earlier, she would much rather do this peacefully, right? Like
absolutely.
now, like, by the way, the Taiwanese might go down fighting, but he
Mhm.
would much rather do it not having to fight the United States at a minimum. Like, maybe he's watching Trump, tear up all of these US alliances, being like, well, maybe I just have to wait another year. Like, this will
Yeah,
make my life easier. So, yeah, I
yeah.
couldn't tell you, but those are some thoughts.
Yeah, and we've already talked about the Japanese and Korean
Yeah.
positions on this, and the Filipinos, like, they have both in this too, just by virtue of being in the neighborhood.
Yep.
So it's certainly not a simple problem for Xi Jinping. And, like, one thing we've seen about him is maybe not that he's a careful guy, but he's certainly a deliberate guy
Yeah.
and very systematic. So
And
I
he's
don't know
had a
what that
lot of
means.
success with that.
Yeah, absolutely. Not perfect success, but yeah, China's done pretty well. Anyway, we're going to leave it there for now. This has been another episode of Global Tantrum. Awesome to see you again, Galen.
You too,
And
man.
thanks for the great episode.
You too.